You know, when you're waiting in line for a roller coaster and you see those signs, the ones that say if you have heart issues or respiratory issues, you shouldn't ride this ride? Well, if you have those and you got strong feelings about Homage watches, you probably shouldn't watch this review. Seriously, you should probably stop right here because I don't want to be responsible for sending anyone to the hospital. And that's because today we're checking out the Cronos L6019, a straight up 36mm Explorer Homage. It's a one for one or generic or whatever you want to call it. It is what it is here. Personally, I don't have anything against them, but these days I do try to shy away from one for one homages. And that's just because I think more original watches are more interesting to talk about. There's only so much you can say about Mercedes hands. But today I'm checking this out all because of a friend. I'm sure at some point he's going to watch this, but the short version is that he loves the Explorer design. And right now, getting a Rolex Explorer is his grail. So he's been getting various homages to help him make sure it's what he really wants, as well as to help him decide what size he wants to go for. The more current 36mm, the slightly older 39, or now the new 40mm. And I think that's one thing people forget about affordable Homage watches, that they can help you make up your mind on a grail. And it's extremely helpful with some of the more harder to find grails. I mean, there's no point being on a wait list for a year if you get it and don't like it. But anyway, he wound up getting the 39mm version of this and just raved about the build quality. Enough so that he convinced me to check one out. So I reached out to Cronos and asked for one to review. And I thought the newer 36mm version they had would be the more interesting and perhaps more relevant watch to check out. So they sent this one over. And if you didn't notice already, the promotional tag is up because I don't have to send this one back. Now, that said, let's talk specs. As I said, this is the 36mm version, which also comes with a lug-to-lug of 43.4 and a total thickness of 11.8mm. Which is going from the very generic looking closed case back to the nice box cut sapphire crystal rising just slightly out of the highly polished bezel. Water resistance is 100 meters, and that is with a signed screw down crown. There's a 20mm lug width, it's around 125 grams on its bracelet, and it's all powered by a Seiko NH35 movement. Although, interestingly, the 39mm version uses either a Miyota 8215 or the newer 8315 with an extended power reserve. Now, since this is a one for one, I'm not really going to focus on the design here. I just don't really see a point. Because Cronos isn't responsible for it, and you're not going to be looking at this if you don't have any interest in the design already. Instead, I'm just going to focus more on the build quality and what I like and don't like here. As for the build quality, for the most part, it's great for the price. It's actually been a while since I looked at anything from Cronos, but the last time I did, I was very impressed, and I'm still impressed now. As far as Ollie watches go, I'd say they're up there with San Martin. So for the price, it has a great solid well-made feel to it. The dial is especially well done and beautiful to look at. The indices are applied and have a nice definition to them. They aren't too tall, but they are tall enough to give the watch a nice level of depth. The standard Mercedes handset also looks good here, but not quite as good as the indices, especially because they just seem to be floating on this black abyss. The dial itself has this great piano black glossy nature to it that seems to absorb everything. Although, at the same time, that can lead to some occasional glare, so perhaps some more anti-reflection on the crystal would be helpful here. One thing I thought was interesting was the Cronos branding at the top. It's an applied metallic logo in a rather thin font. Sometimes it's very apparent, but other times just fades into the background, giving the watch a really nice and clean look, helping the dial seem just a bit larger and maybe more expansive than it actually is. After wearing it for a few days, I was actually surprised it was a 36mm, as I thought 36 would seem a lot smaller. Personally, I think I would still prefer a 39, but the 36 here didn't seem small by any means. I think because of the dial design, that the indices just seem to pop out of it, and that wide, highly polished clean bezel, it altogether gives the watch a rather significant presence. And especially on its bracelet. Now, take that bracelet off and put it on a strap, and it does start to look a little bit more petite. But with the bracelet, it seems larger. And speaking of straps, be warned here that there isn't much clearance between the case and the spring bar. so only really thin straps will work here, and a lot of the ones you have probably won't. The case is also fairly well done. It's mostly brushed except for the highly polished bezel and sidewalls, which again, personally I would prefer something that's more brushed. But that's not really what they're going for here, and I understand that. And in the end, I did notice a few micro scratches on those sidewalls after I was done filming. Now, I don't think that's necessarily a dig at the watch. As I've said before, it's just life with polished sides. The bottom edge of the lugs also has a rather sharp edge to them, which for the price is probably excusable. Yet it is even worse with the clasp. The bracelet itself is great. It's an oyster style with solid links secured with screws. There's solid end links, a great taper going from 20 to 15, and a milled clasp. But since they were going for the whole 1-for-1, they went with this type of clasp. And I just found the edges to it rather sharp, and honestly it was unpleasant just to open it up to take it off. And even though it does look it, it doesn't have any sort of on-the-fly quick adjustment system. Just this odd diver's extension setup. So personally, I would have ditched this whole thing just for a standard push-button clasp with a better, smoother finish. But again, I know that's not really what they're going for. And this clasp is probably my only real issue with the watch. The only other thing I could possibly nitpick on it is that it has a ghost date. Not only is there a middle position with the crown, but I can also hear and feel a date wheel flipping over when setting the time. But again, for around 165 bucks, is that really a big issue? As for LUME, that was one area that Cronos really impressed me last time. And they've done it again. This one has a nice bright BGW9 LUME that seems to go the distance, with it being able to keep up with the Seiko diver in my longevity test. So no complaints here. And as for price and value, I think this one, as well as the 39mm version, are going for around 165 bucks. As usual with AliExpress, it fluctuates. And since we are talking about an Ollie watch, generally that's just hard to beat. Yes, there are probably some cheaper Pagani's out there. But to be honest, I haven't checked out a Pagani in a long time. I had a bad experience with the brand a couple years ago, and I haven't really looked back. I just didn't feel it was worth the risk. Which does bring up my consistent and standard AliExpress warning. That when it comes to value, they're great and hard to beat, but it also comes with higher risks. As even under ideal circumstances, if anything goes wrong, it's still a pain to deal with. But even with that, a lot of people still feel it's worth the risk. So just know that going into it. Regardless, bottom line here, it's a borrowed design, but solid watch with a solid price. And one that's pretty comfortable on the wrist. With this 36mm size and that really short lug to lug, this should be one anyone should be able to wear. Although the question is whether or not you want to. Now, if I'm being perfectly honest, I'm probably not going to wear this one much going forward. It's a solid watch, but longtime viewers know how I feel about Mercedes hands. Although, I gotta say that after spending some time with it, I do have a new appreciation for the design. And I fully understand why so many are obsessed with it, how it's inspired so many grails, and why so many different companies have made so many different homages to it. As technically, it's a pretty capable field watch, so it's easy to read. Yet the way it's done with these highly polished areas gives it a touch of refinement, making it a bit of a hybrid, and in that way it's kind of entering sports watch territory. Then throw in a nice glossy black dial, and this is one that would look at home dressed up as well. So it is a true, and maybe the original, go anywhere, do anything design. Anyway, that's all I got for you. As usual, let me know what you think about this one down below. And if you want to vent about homages, feel free to do that as well. And as always, if you enjoyed the video, don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, click something down below. I'm Shane, this is Rolf Time, and I'll see you next time.